Okay, so here we are a few days, 4 days into the campaign right now, and we now have some post-writ polls out showing that the Liberals are in the lead and doing quite well. However, the Conservatives aren't doing that bad. Yes, they've lost the lead, but they're staying in the high 30s and sometimes in the 40s. So if there is a misstep by the Liberals, which there might have just been a big one, we'll see, the Conservatives are in a position to actually make up that misstep. So we're going to go into the ridings today. We're going to go into the polling aggregate in this video later on, kind of look at where the Liberals have picked up and where the Conservatives also have an opportunity. There have been some shifts. We're going to talk a little bit about the collapse of the NDP, but each one of the political parties had their own problems over the last 2 days. Let's go ahead and first start with the Liberal Party. Now, one of the things that a lot of people, both the political parties and people in media, have criticized with Mark Carney is his French ability. It is something that has been talked about a lot, and he has struggled with French.
I'm very much out in the open. Je ne cache pas.
I'm not hiding.
But a few days ago, he decided, and the Liberal Party decided, not to participate in the TVA face-à-face debate. So this is maybe huge, maybe not. We don't know, because right now the Liberal Party is doing quite well in Quebec with about 40% of the vote to the Conservatives and the Bloc Québécois, mid 20%. So you see them fluctuating in those numbers. So could possibly the Liberals lose their lead in Quebec? Maybe. So the whole idea that the Liberals left the debate, they said that was for two reasons. One, that the Green Party was not being allowed to participate in it. That was their first excuse. The second excuse was actually that it cost $75,000 to actually be part of this debate. So TVA asked all of the participants to give $75,000 because it's costing a lot to hold this debate, and we'd like to offset the cost because it is a public service. And all the other parties said yes. The Liberal Party said no. But in a baller move by Pierre Poilievre, he said, hey, listen, I'll go ahead and pay for your fee if you want to participate in the debate, if that's what it is. Here's the clip from him.
Conservatives will even pay the fee to bring him out. If he's not afraid. And by the way, if he is afraid to have the debate, how is he going to have the courage to stand up against Donald Trump?
And by doing that move, he's kind of removing the it cost money and we don't want to pay for a debate thing to purely his French abilities. So some people say that it is a hindrance. Some people say, hey, we can understand why he is actually not participating in this debate. Here's a reaction of some people in Montreal.
It looks like maybe he doesn't have, the French language at heart.
Ça part mal.
It's a bad start to his campaign in Quebec because there's a French-speaking part of Canada, and I think it's an insult to the French-speaking people of Quebec.
D'accord avec lui.
I agree with Carney because if he'd accepted, it creates a precedent. He put his big boy pants on. He said no.
So yeah, whether this affects him or not, we'll have to look over in the next few polls and see if those Quebec numbers start going down, and especially the Bloc Québécois numbers going up. Because if there is a benefactor in all this, it will be the Bloc Québécois retaining the seats that they have now. The Conservatives, I wouldn't say have necessarily maxed out in Quebec, but they are almost at that point now. So it does look like the Conservatives aren't really going to gain much, but the Liberals could lose maybe 4 or 5 ridings to the Bloc Québécois. The Bloc Québécois going ahead and retaining those. So we'll see if this is a big thing. It looks like it could be, it looks like it could both have the potential of being a nothing burger, but also a major issue. We just have to look over the next few days and see what happens. As for the Conservative Party, they have their own little controversy as well. So it came out that there might have been Indian interference from the Indian government in helping Pierre Poilievre win the Conservative Party nod. Now, I don't think that this is a really big issue because Pierre Poilievre would have won one way or another, whether the Indian government had interfered and helped him get elected or not. So at the end of the day, it didn't really change the outcome. And because Pierre Poilievre won it by quite a bit, even without any possible interference, he would have won it by quite a bit. So the news isn't really talking about this. I don't think it's really going to be an issue, but it is something that is circulating out there that people are talking about. All right, now finally, let's talk about the NDP, because they might have, again, a major problem or something that's absolutely nothing. We don't know until the polls come out. But Thomas Mulcair, the former leader of the NDP in the House, he took over after Jack Layton died. He was then elected to be the leader of the NDP. He now says that you should not vote for the NDP. Now, he hasn't done this before, but he's saying in this election, the NDP cannot form government. They can't even be a good opposition. And as we've mentioned on this channel before, they might not even get official party status. So he's saying, hey, listen, it's between the Conservatives and the Liberals. Now, he doesn't really make clear as to who to go against. He says, we need to fight Trump. So therefore, we need a majority government to take on Trump and not to have instability in government. And that's been a lot of talk amongst kind of soft NDP voters as well. But will that actually matter? It could matter, because around 20%, 21%, according to the latest Angus Reid poll, say that the NDP support that they have might not be strong. 21% of NDP voters say they could go over to another side. Now, because the NDP is to the left, most of that would be toward the Liberal Party. But if you go out to British Columbia and to the Pacific coast of British Columbia, that could actually help the Conservatives, which we will look at when we look at the map in a few minutes here. But Thomas Mulcair, one could say, ever since he left the House of Commons and essentially kind of left the NDP, even though he's still a member, he has been very, very critical of the NDP. He has not been a fan of theirs, or he hasn't even come across as being a fan of theirs since he got into media, being on CTV all the time. This article that he has in Bloomberg Canada kind of pushes that I'm not really happy with where the NDP is, pushes it over the edge. Does it have an impact? Maybe with that 20% who might now jump over. We'll see if the polls change, but it might not have an impact because the NDP are already in such a low position that maybe they're at their rock bottom base now. We'll have to look at the polls and see what happens. Now, I did not mention Danielle Smith for the Conservatives and how she's either doing gaffes or maybe doing something intentional. If you go over to my Substack and listen to the podcast that I just dropped today with Carter Krishnaiyer, we actually talk a lot about Danielle Smith and Kevin O'Leary. I will probably be talking about that in a video in the future or maybe after the election. But if you want to know my views of Danielle Smith, please go to that podcast, go to my Substack. It's going to be listed down below in the description, and you can listen to what I think is going to be a hostile takeover of the Conservative Party if the Liberals win. So go ahead, check that out. All right, so now that we've gone over some of the news, let's look at the polling aggregates that I have here on Voting Trend, my Substack, and on my YouTube channel. If you're on my YouTube channel and want to see more that I provide, and I provide a lot more on my Substack, please go ahead and subscribe to my Substack. It's linked down below in the description. You can also see at the bottom of the screen here. So please go ahead and become a member of my Substack. Now, this map that we have here that shows the current projections based on the polling, this is available for my paid Substack members. So if you're interested in looking at all these individual writings, you can go there and check it out. But let's go ahead and look at the overall picture, and let's look at how the recent polls have actually impacted the election, because the recent polls have been more favorable toward the Liberals and show them now in good majority territory. Now, we're looking at their upper and lower bounds. So as of right now, these are the likely numbers that we could see for the Liberals. So the lowest number for the Liberals we can see is 143 seats. Now remember, the majority is 172 seats. So this could put them in a minority government if they have the plurality of seats. Right now, the expected number is 184, but that also depends on writings that are extremely close right now and that the Liberals are just slightly ahead in. So those include those. So don't look at that number as kind of a set number. Look at that as where the average is but the low number is 143. The high number, on the other hand, is 214. Now, this would be the best case scenario for the Liberal Party. They will not hit 214, probably. I mean, unless it's an unbelievably amazing night, but chances are they're not going to do that. So just look at the seat range is going to be within 143 to 214, with the average right now being 184, which gives them 12 seats in the majority. Now, if we look at the Conservatives, it's a little bit of a different story. So you can see their high count, the best that they could do right now is 159 seats. That would be enough probably to form government, but it would be a minority government. As of right now, the Conservatives are not in majority range. And the reason why that is that when we look at the overall polling number when it comes to Canada, Alberta and Saskatchewan, their high percentages of 55, 56, 58, sometimes 60% really skews the national average, because the Liberals tend to be in provinces winning where the margins are much, much smaller. So those numbers do inflate it. Atlantic Canada sometimes inflates it for the Liberals, but it is an issue. But as of right now, they're not in majority range. Now, the lowest that they'll get is 101 seats. They would be out of government, obviously, then. But 159, they could form a minority government. But as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, let's see what happens in Quebec. Let's see what happens in other places. The Conservatives could be in majority range very, very soon. We'll see. The NDP continue to have problems, and they haven't changed from my last video. So you see the NDP, the best they can do right now is 17 seats. The worst they can do is 6, with their average being around 8. Most of those seats are in cities, and that's where their support is. The Bloc Québécois right now, the worst they do as of right now are 18 seats, compared to 31 would be their best, with 24 being their projected number. So that 31 is a little, is going to be a hit. So do they actually take this TVA face-à-face debate and turn it into their advantage? They're already starting to do that in the media. The question is, will that show up in the polling? Or do Quebec voters not even really care about that, since Mark Carney will be actually involved with the Commission's French debate that's going to be on April 16th? So that's another question as well. The Greens could lose both of their seats, but they're more than likely going to hold on to the seats that they have in British Columbia and in Kitchener. So this is what we should expect. So now let's go ahead and go over to the map. So we can see in Atlantic Canada, there hasn't been much of a change. We do see South Shore St. Margaret's now flipping very slightly over to the Liberals, and they have a bit of a gap there. Now, I will say in the polling aggregate, and this is very, very important, the Leger poll could be pulling Atlantic Canada way more into the Liberal side. They had Atlantic Canada going 70% for the Liberals. So yes, they're in the lead right here, making this the second most competitive riding in the nation. I would argue that maybe the Leger poll in these aggregates are pulling it that direction. So the polling aggregate is only as good as the polls are, right? Many of you who have watched my channel before, I am not a fan of polling aggregates, but in this election right now, we really don't have much of a choice but to use it, because the advanced polling, or the early voting numbers, as we would know in the United States, aren't quite the same in Canada. But when those numbers start coming in, maybe we can glean something else. Yes, this is red, but I think it's a soft red based on the Leger poll. As we get more polls in, maybe we'll see some change. As far as Quebec is concerned, as I mentioned before, we did see the Liberals start improving more. So the Shefford riding is now going to the Liberals. It was going to the NDP before. Everything in and around the island of Montreal is essentially the same. And up by Quebec City, everything is essentially the same. So there is no real change in the province of Quebec. When it comes to Ontario, it is changing a little bit. So now we are starting to see some other riding. So out here in Kitchener, we see a riding now flipping over to the Liberals. As you can see, these are very, very close numbers. It's just that they're slightly winning in the average. Now, if we go to Milton East, which is a new district, we see the Liberals doing slightly better. In our last map that we had the Conservatives up there. But you look at some of the other seats like King Vaughan, which is going to be a competitive seat, it's still slightly toward the Conservatives. Now, if we go down here, Niagara Falls, Niagara South, we do see this now as a pickup for the Liberals. So they are picking up or doing a little bit better in some of the GTA ridings. The question is, will those start flipping back? The Liberals look okay. I mean, they look in a good position in Ontario, but again, you know, we're talking about very small margins. When you're talking about, let's say, this Milton East seat, what the Conservatives only down by, 1.2% essentially, when the real votes come, that can go Conservatives. So I never consider these numbers to be hard numbers. When I see that as red, I don't really see it as, hey, this is going to go to the Liberals. That's why I have that vote range when we look at overall seats to show the high and the low numbers. And that's the reason why in the map that I have here, which you can see on my Substack, you see the low bounds and the upper bounds of what the lowest vote they'll get and the highest vote they get. So if we look at Milton East here, we can see the lowest that the Liberals could get is 42%. Now, if we look at the Conservatives, the highest they can get is 48%. So that would be a win for the Conservatives. So you want to not just look at that average. That's just kind of where the average is. Obviously, you want to look at how competitive it is by how much swing there can be in those lower and upper bounds of the votes. Now, if we go over to Manitoba, we do have the Liberal Party actually picking up a few more. Kildonan, St. Paul here is now a pickup for the Liberals. So now the Liberals are starting to, most of these are safe. Winnipeg Center is also a competitive one in which the Liberals are now winning over the NDP, but I think they have been up in this rank. You are seeing the Liberals starting to solidify Winnipeg again. So that will be interesting, but they've always done quite well. Saskatchewan, there has been no change. When it comes to Edmonton, there has been very little change, but a change nonetheless. Calgary is essentially the same with these two ridings. McKnight is a new riding, this one going for the Liberals. But then if we go up to Edmonton, we do see that this riding here, Edmonton Griesbach, I don't know, put the pronunciation down below if you do know it, has now flipped over to the Conservatives from the NDP. Now, when we get further west, you are going to see more NDP ridings flip to the Conservative side instead of the Liberal side. Not in all cases, but you will see them, and this is one of those places. And where you really can see them is in British Columbia. So as I mentioned before, in a normal election, these have all been NDP orange. They're not. They're all Conservative blue, and they're pretty safely Conservative blue because the polling numbers that we have right now coming out of British Columbia shows a total collapse of the NDP. So they lose essentially everything all the way down here to Victoria, which is an NDP seat also as well, but it's shown that the Liberals are safely in it. So remember, it's not just the polling that's impacting these numbers, it's the redistribution of the votes and the seats that now different seats have been drawn up that, I mean, really the NDP was not favored at all in the redrawing of the seats. Conservatives were, Liberals were. Maybe we're moving back to a two-party system because I would even argue right now we might not even be at a 2.5-party system, except in the province of Quebec. And now if we go ahead and look in Vancouver itself, we see that the NDP is down to one seat, Vancouver East. So you see here, let's see, for example, Vancouver Kingsway. I think this is Don Davies' seat. He's a big name. He's a big fish. According to this, he would lose maybe possibly handily, but it is a pickup opportunity, 44th most competitive seat. If we look at New Westminster, Burnaby, and I guess Maillardville, not sure, again, put the pronunciation below, we see now that the Liberals, in the last video we did, the NDP was ahead. Now we see the Liberals ahead because of the collapse of the NDP support in British Columbia. And this is Peter Julian's seat. So we're talking about some really big fish. And this is a video that I'll be making tomorrow, maybe even today, don't know yet, that the NDP are in a huge position of disadvantage, that not only can they lose so many of their seats, but the people who are going to be losing their seats are people who would have maybe been considered the leaders once Jagmeet Singh loses. And he actually looks like he's going to lose his seat quite handily as well. So it creates a power vacuum within the NDP. There are really one person that can lead the NDP from this point on, Alexander Bolduris. He's probably the only one that can lead the NDP right now after this election. His riding in Montreal should be safe. But it might not be safe. They might have internal polling within that riding in the NDP showing that that's not safe. Hence the reason why Jagmeet Singh spent his first day in Montreal, because they cannot pick up any more seats in the province. So the Liberals are ahead. They've polled about 8% more in the province of Ontario, but that could be very soft support over the next few weeks. Obviously, this collapse, absolutely. So thank you all very much for joining me. Go ahead and like and subscribe if you've made it this far. And please go ahead and join my Substack for more information about this election and other elections around the world. I'll see you all later. Have a wonderful day wherever it is you are. Bye-bye.